Oh no, look at this. I just got some shit on my shirt. My drink poured onto my shirt just like
Oh no.
That's
5 seconds before we start the interview. It's all right. I'll leave this little part in so that the people watching don't shame me. Um, you know,
slop.
yeah, spills happen. Whatever. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind. I am your host, James W. Jesso, and happy to be returning from a short 2-episode break where I took the opportunity to, take a little bit of a mindset rest or refresh, but also to clean up a bunch of stuff on the background. There's a lot of invisible work that goes into you enjoying this media, the content that I put out, and it got sort of backlogged because it is a lot of work for one person. And I'm happy to say that I managed to achieve all of that cleaning up in the time frame that I had, as well as take a little bit of time for myself to come back renewed and excited about this episode in particular, as well as the other ones that'll come up. I feel very excited about the interviews I've recorded for you guys. But yeah, today we have Tom and Sheri Eckert. As husband and wife founders of the Oregon Psilocybin Society and authors of the Psilocybin Service Initiative, Tom and Sheri Eckert have set in motion a historic campaign to legalize psilocybin services, also known as psilocybin-assisted therapy, in their home state of Oregon. A growing number of Oregonians are getting behind the idea, largely in response to the latest science. The Eckerts, with a growing army of volunteers, are spreading a truth held increasingly self-evident, that the psilocybin experience, when facilitated under safe and supportive conditions, can be a life-changing gift. In addition to their activisms, the Eckerts own and operate Inner Work, a private psychotherapy practice serving the Portland metro area. Included in their catalog of services is their groundbreaking Better Man program, which is shown to neutralize intimate partner and family violence. Oftentimes on the show, the intro is used as an opportunity to explain why certain topics are being curated into the larger narrative of the show as a course of investigation, excavation, and knowledge sharing. And that's not really necessary for this episode, is it? Because, I mean, it's pretty obvious why I would have Tom and Sheri on the show. I mean, just psilocybin itself is something that is, I just stumble for words, honestly, because it's just been so meaningful in my life. So it's incredible to see what these two are doing and the dreams that they are bringing into reality, at least in the state of Oregon, if not as a consequence, many more places around the world. In fact, I'm even wearing my Oregon Psilocybin Society shirt today as a commemoration, a celebration of what they are doing, and of course that I have them on the show. So feeling excited. In fact, you can get yourself a shirt by heading to the links that are contained at jameswjesso.com and for the show notes, in the show notes for this episode, and buying a shirt goes towards supporting their campaign. Alternatively, or additionally, whichever you prefer, you can also support the podcast by buying a t-shirt over at the Adventures Through the Mind gift shop, which is now open with art and lectures and other things that you can invest in that support the show and get you cool swag. And you could also, just like the people whose names are listed on the screen right now, support the show on Patreon, which is amazing. Thank you very much to those people and to my other patrons, and to everyone who has left one-time PayPal or crypto donations, which is also available to you, the listener, to do if you like the show and you'd like to put a little bit into its continued existence. Links to do that will be contained in the description to this episode, as well as at jameswjesso.com/support. One final thing before the interview begins is that if you don't already know, there is now a subreddit for Adventures Through the Mind. It is r/@mind podcast, ATTMind podcast, where you can engage in discussion around the episodes, meet other people who are following the show. You will be able, if you're a patron, you get sort of a special Patreon tag to show people on the group that you're a patron of the show, and you get to see who is patrons. And either way, it's exciting. A lot of the reason why I do this is because I think that the value of an ongoing conversation about what it means to integrate psychedelic experiences into our lives, and I mean that in a very broad sense, something akin to, what does it mean to be a psychedelic person? Because it's not just our dress, and it's not just our aesthetic or musical interests, or our generally the activities that we choose to get involved with. There's something much deeper than that. And what it is, I don't entirely know, but, I think an ongoing conversation about what that is, this podcast being my contribution to that, is important. I do believe it is. So would love for you to get onto the subreddit. Check it out. There will be a link in the description to this episode to the posting of this episode on the Reddit for you to check out. But you could also just head to r/@mind podcast and check it out that way. Okay, that's enough preamble for now. Very excited to be back here with you guys for this episode, and happy to be sharing my conversation with Tom and Sheri Eckert. Enjoy. All right, so why don't we get rolling into the podcast? Thomas and Sheri, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Oregon, the Psy 2020 movement, and how far along it is at this point?
Yeah, so we've been at this a few years, 3 years, 4 years now. Basically what it is a ballot initiative campaign. So here in Oregon, we have direct democracy in a way, which means that we can put something on the ballot if we work really hard and get 140,000 signatures and develop our own platform, and that's what we've been doing. So the last several years we've been developing that platform, creating a coalition, and now we're into the signature gathering phase. So now we're looking at getting this on the ballot in 2020.
And just to be completely accurate, we don't need 140,000 signatures by the state. We need around,
112,200 official valid signatures.
So we're shooting for the 140,000 because we know there's duplicates and non-registered voters and people who sign it from Amsterdam because they're in Portland and they think it's a cool initiative. And so that's why the numbers are high like that. But yeah, we started this in our heart and in our mind in 2015 after reading an article by Michael Pollan, The Trip Treatment. And we had already been watching the studies, and we were really excited to see how things unfolded with psychedelic assisted therapy. And we decided that we needed to do a little bit more investigation personally, which we did, and led us to the base of Mount Rainier in Washington. We decided to ask the mushroom for some advice, and we did so. And what we already felt convicted of as therapists, as human beings who just love humanity, was really made clear to us that evening, as we conceived the Oregon Psilocybin Service Initiative.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a few steps back, because I assume most of the listeners kind of have a sense of. I'm not sure what I'll say in the interview. I record that well later, like just before I put it up. But as so far as what the content of the interview has offered so far, I don't actually know what it is that you're doing. What are you proposing, and what are you getting signatures for? What is this conviction that the mushrooms have landed in your heart and soul in this world?
Good question.
Yes, it's really about opening up the healing powers of psilocybin via therapeutic modality. So we are wanting to create access to psilocybin services, and what we mean by that is essentially a sequence of sessions following the cues from the science that have been developed, well, since some ways time immemorial. There's been thousands of years of psilocybin use, but in the modern day, going back to the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of research about setting, about preparation and intent, and about guidance. And by guidance, I really mean just facilitation, not intervention. But anyway, the Psilocybin Service Initiative, when we say psilocybin services, we mean preparation session, and then a psychedelic session, and then integration afterwards. And it's that modality that we're proposing. We want to create access to those kind of services in licensed centers, independently licensed centers, where facilitators who have been trained to do this kind of work can facilitate clients in having a journey that is shown to be so effective and healing in so many different ways.
In addition to that, it's really important to us that anyone over 21 can have the opportunity to not only perhaps attain healing, but also perhaps just to explore their consciousness, just to look at themselves in a very genuine and authentic way, which is what psilocybin ultimately does. Is you might go in with one intention, and the mushroom will show you that there's other things that perhaps you need to be looking at. And so we were very careful when crafting this initiative that we didn't exclude anybody for medical purposes only, that it would allow people to just come in a safe environment and sit down with somebody and look at themselves.
So in other words, it's not based on qualifying conditions like medical marijuana used to be back in the day. Mm-hmm. And that's because the research shows that it's first and foremost safe when approached in this careful manner. Now, let me point out that there's an assessment as well. So there are contraindications to using psilocybin. But if there are no contraindications, this is a safe modality. And it not only addresses mental health issues, but it supports things like spiritual connectedness, eco-mindedness, openness. It actually, buried in the research, are findings that show that psilocybin facilitates personality change in a pro-social manner, specifically in an aspect of personality called openness, mm-hmm. which is associated with things like empathy and creativity and things like that. So why would we get in the way of allowing access to these services when they're in fact safe?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that you asked that as a rhetorical question, but I'm sure we could get into the nitty-gritty of social control mechanisms and racism and political divisiveness and all that stuff, but we won't, because I want to ask a little bit of a deeper question. First off, from what I understand, you're telling me that you've started a political initiative in Oregon, which is utilizing the democratic processes that you have available to you in that state to move towards legislating an allowance to psilocybin facilitated therapy / facilitation in general services, that you don't need to be necessarily sick to get it, and you don't necessarily need to be a doctor to get certified to provide these services. Is that correct?
That's correct. And as Tom mentioned in the very beginning, there is an assessment, and that is because there are some contraindications that he was talking about, and those basically have to do with where you're at as a human being in terms of your mental health in the first place. If you're psychotic, you're already a bit loose and open, right? And this medicine, this beautiful mushroom, what it does is it opens up the brain in such a way that the parts of your brain that aren't talking to each other suddenly start talking to each other. It's like being in high school and there's cliques, and this group hangs out over there and they talk about cheerleading, and this group hangs out over here and they talk about football, and another group hangs out over there and they talk about science, and they don't all talk with each other. And psilocybin opens up your mind in such a way that everybody looks around and says, oh, hey, there's cheerleaders and basketball players and football players and math people here. Let's all converse. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, that's the openness it provides. Now, if you're already sitting with a diagnosis, or you have the propensity towards a mental health condition such as, like, maybe I would say the biggest one is schizophrenia, perhaps. You don't want this. This is not your medicine. This is not your plant. And so the assessment actually helps us to make sure that that is not something that we're going to service somebody with. In addition, there are some medications when people have certain heart conditions. There are some medications that might not work well with psilocybin. And so psilocybin in and of itself is safe on the body. But when it's combined with other things, and there's not many medications that are going to interrupt the process, but there are some. And part of this initiative, a big part of the heart of this initiative is safety. So we want to make sure that not only is the public in general safe, but every individual who comes in for services, regardless of why they're there, whether it's for personal growth or whether it's for mental health healing, whether it's for addictions, that they are safe. And that's really important to Tom and I.
Mm-hmm. So there's another few things that you guys are proposing to bring into legislation beyond just the services. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what happens to the average person who, to be honest, doesn't really give a shit about going and having psilocybin services. They want their mushrooms and they have a relationship with them and they don't need you to sit there with them. They just want to eat the mushrooms and connect with, I don't know, God or the trees or whatever. What about those people?
Well, good news. The initiative lowers penalties for common possession of psilocybin for personal use. It doesn't legalize psilocybin, but it brings it out of the realm of criminal penalties. In other words, you won't go to jail, you won't get arrested, you won't lose your job if on the off chance you get caught with psilocybin. So we did that just because of our conscience. I think it just, the current laws, drug laws in general, need a lot of work. And since we're focusing on psilocybin, we thought we could take this opportunity to put something in the initiative that would create reasonable penalties for psilocybin possession. And so we're talking about a violation, basically. So completely taken out of the realm of misdemeanor and felony if it's just a small amount, if you don't have a record of
being a drug dealer,
manufacturing and stuff like that. So yeah, it's pretty significant reduction.
Mm-hmm. So how do you propose to handle the production, like the supply chain? Does the legislation mean that, if I'm a certified facilitator, I can go pick my own mushrooms and you can come in and get services from me and eat the mushrooms? Or is there something inside of your initiative that explains how access to, say, synthesized or extracted, synthesized psilocybin is going to be made available for facilitators, for service providers?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's standalone licenses for every piece of this picture. So facilitators get training and get licensed. There's a separate license for production of psilocybin products, as we call them. Mm-hmm. Now that could be natural psilocybin from mushrooms, extracted in various ways, and there's a lot of interesting technology that's developing in that regard to create products that are carefully dosed and things of that nature.
And fun, like a gummy bear.
Yeah. It
depends on what's in that gummy bear.
We'll leave it there. Yeah, but also synthetic. You could. In the language itself, we carefully made it impossible to exclude organic psilocybin, because you got to remember, once the legislation, if it were to pass, it's kind of out of our hands. We're no longer kind of in control of it. So you put into the initiative safeguards to help prevent or protect the spirit of what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And one of those safeguards was that the OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, wouldn't be able to eliminate mushrooms themselves from this new service industry, I guess you could call it. And that's because we don't want it to move in the direction of pharma and get kind of clamped down in that world. And that's also why we kind of pulled back from making it just locked up in doctors' offices and hospitals and things like that. We really want to see this as a community-based service framework. Now, the production side of that would be, again, standalone license. You could apply. And once the initiative is passed, there'll be specifics around what that application procedure looks like.
And to answer your question, though, does this mean that you can get a license, grow them at home, and eat them yourself? The answer is no. That's what the other part of the initiative does by reducing penalties. So if you are growing enough for personal use at home and the authorities knock on your door and they come in and they see that you have some mushrooms that you're growing for personal use, you will not go to jail. You will not have a criminal record. You are protected by this particular initiative specifically for personal use. So while you may not be able to get licensed and be able to take them yourself from what you grow, you will not go to jail. So the production part of the initiative basically states what kind of product is going to be made, who's going to be making it, licensed to make it, and then how that's going to be delivered to service centers and utilized by facilitators. So that's
be all carefully tracked. Like cannabis here in Oregon, it's not like cannabis in terms of selling to the public, but there's a tracking system to show how much is moving around where and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty carefully regulated in that sense.
I think it's important also to point out that you could have a license for all three. So you could be a producer with a service center who facilitates sessions. You can have a license for all three. There are different licenses, and they will have different regulatory frameworks around the license. But you could do all three if you wanted. So, for instance, if you're interested in some sort of a full holistic community service center, you can do the whole thing. You can grow them, and maybe your clients could watch them grow. We don't know yet. This is all hypothetical.
I assume you mean the training?
The training, yeah.
So that's another license is to become an approved training facility. So yeah, you could be integrated and have a compound and do all these different things. It's kind of a neat idea. It's fun to imagine kind of the marketplace in the future, as things evolve.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about... sorry, I see there was a moment where your audio got totally cut because I started speaking. I apologize about that. Skype. I'm wondering about... From what I understand, the Pacific Northwest is unlike anywhere else in the world. It's very unique. It's very beautiful. I've never been south of the border to be there. Unfortunately, there's a story.
Stay with us, James.
There's a story. I mean, how strong is your legal team? Because there's some psilocybin-related issues that prevent me from getting to the United States, sadly, and it's very expensive to resolve. But, okay, so that all that beautiful stuff said, you don't exist in a vacuum. You are still part of the United States of America, which is sort of like classically known, internationally known as being essentially a drug prohibition country in many ways, assuming you're not big pharma. It's very heavy on the drug prohibition. During the medicalization of cannabis or like slow state level legalization, the DEA was continuing to come in and, arrest people on federal charges and all these things. I'm just curious what's going through your mind, or what steps have you taken to try to sort of protect this initiative and protect the people involved from the draconian powers of the larger United States federal government, which, I mean, anyone paying attention seems pretty hell-bent on continuing their archaic drug prohibition laws despite fact and evidence, common sense. What are you doing about this?
Well, one of the beautiful things about this country is that while we are the United States, we are also individually states. And the state itself has power that may not be under... in other words, we can, with this particular initiative, we can, like cannabis, legalize something for the state. And
to James's point, the federal law supersedes state law.
Yes.
That could all come down. And so your point is valid and frightening.
Yeah.
But, to Sheri's point, this is what the United States is made of, is the different voices within the United States, and that comes in the form of different states, kind of making their will known. Mm-hmm. And so there is an element of courage and boldness about doing something like this. And ultimately, how do we safeguard against it? Well, you can't. I mean, what you can do is create a coalition and a voice that stands its ground.
In that case, much like cannabis, right?
I think that, look at cannabis, part of why it holds is because it's popular, right? Mm-hmm. If it's not an issue that people want to mess with because they're just going to mess with their own constituency, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we're trying to get to with the psychedelic movement more generally, and certainly here in Oregon. We need to have a strong lobbying voice. I think that if this were to pass, this is not where our head's at because we got our hands full trying to make this happen. But if we were to get to the other side of it, then the work would be around lobbying and changing, potentially unfolding across the country, developing a coalition that's strong and steady, mm-hmm. To be a counterbalance to any forces that would want to undermine it.
And while we do have this draconian type of United States of America, so to say, it's important to also note that psilocybin has been given breakthrough status with the FDA, which then it will go through the DEA to get approved to be removed from the Schedule I law, which is ridiculous, yeah. as does MDMA. So we've got these two Schedule I drugs that are currently being given this breakthrough status, which means that, at least for me, when I think about that, it means that there is already kind of a shift taking place mm-hmm. within our government in terms of what do we really want to do? Do we really want to hold on to this law that says that something that actually could work to make our country stronger, make the individuals within our country better able to support the country? What do we want to do? Do we just want to keep this under lock, or do we really want to take a look at this and see what the benefits are? And I think the breakthrough status supports that there's a shift in mentality.
I think that highlights the schism between scientific groundedness and political irrationality. Mm-hmm. The FDA is a federal organization this is how drugs move through toward becoming available to the public. It's science-minded, and it's really proving that it's not political because the FDA approval process has moved along nicely. Now, of course, there's all this red tape that's handed down from the politics to make it damn near impossible to do research. Now, these groups like Hefter Research Institute have overcome those obstacles through a lot of private financing. Yeah. But that's not necessarily in step with, Jeff Sessions, mm-hmm. right? So, mm-hmm. This is partly why we move on a state level, is that there's no track record of moving anything out of Schedule I. Mm-hmm. DA stuff looks fantastic, and it all points to change on the horizon, but can we be sure of that?
I'm wondering
through the DEA and things like that, and are they going to just sign off on it?
Cannabis yet.
It hasn't even happened for cannabis. So this is you're right to point out that there's a schism there, and as what can we do other than exercise direct democracy and make the change and then stand our ground, see what happens. I think that it will unfold the way it should, but it's not without dangers, I suppose.
And it's important to remember that the DEA and the FDA and the various other powers that be, they are not solely we, the people of the United States of America. We are the people. It's an entire country full of almost 400 million people, and we have a voice, and we do have a system whereby we exercise our voice through elected representatives. But when those representatives aren't accurately representing we, the people, we do have in place ways to change that. And I think that we're seeing that happen in this country with cannabis, and we're seeing that happen with a more open-mindedness to drug policy reform in general. and
a lot of great issues that actually fit into the psychedelic issue. Like, for example, we are working with a lobbyist lawyer named Catherine Tucker who focuses on end-of-life issues, death with dignity, those kind. And Oregon has made great progress around freedoms for people who are dying. Now she's interested in psilocybin, and we're interested in her coalition because, that's an issue that has made progress from the ground up, I guess is what I'm getting at. There are certain issues that are not going to be resolved necessarily from the top down. They need the voice of the people and the action and the coalition building of people, usually at the state level.
Mm-hmm. Well, change of ingrained direction inside of social structure, political structure, doesn't seem to ever happen from the top down, historically anyways, unless it's a change to favor the top in power. I'm wondering about, and I mean, I don't know how much education I have on this, so it might be a little sort of an unsubstantiated question, but I wonder about the actual, you talk about a country divided politically between the state level, say, and the federal level in regards to initiatives around prohibition of drugs that are clearly, safe or clearly are not warranted to be in Schedule I status. But then you have issues like what the DEA or the FDA is doing, or DEA is doing with kratom, where they try to schedule it, okay, then it stops, and then they launch research, and then they come out saying that it is worthy definitely of a Schedule I status because according to their research, the most common way people use it is injection, which is so far from the truth. And you can't help but wonder, like, so who's in control here while simultaneously drug companies are looking to privatize and proprietize, compounds that are similar enough to mitragynine to, have as patented drugs to kick opioid addiction. So I'm a little at odds, and I'm wondering about, I'm stringing my question together now. I'm wondering about, what type of financial threat this initiative might be under if certain, large money powers that be end up feeling as though your initiative is not in their benefit. For example, large private corporations that are seeking to proprietize psilocybin therapy and synthesis, such as Compass Pathways. So maybe just generally, if you could touch on that, what your concerns might be, and possibly if you want to talk a little bit on what your thoughts are with the Compass Pathways sort of debate happening right now in psychedelic culture.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we certainly expect moneyed influences to show up and be interested in this one way or another. Usually that happens once something is made the ballot. They don't necessarily want to bother messing with you until you're on the ballot. So in other words, after we gather all the signatures and put it on the ballot, we expect. I'm not sure that pharma is going to like any of this. I mean, here we have something that is potentially healing people in one shot, couple doses maybe, and that's not good for business when you're trying to sell pills. But that's the good news, and that's why this is coming from the people, because it's about healing, not selling pills. But that's not the way corporations necessarily look at things. So no doubt that those groups will come out of the woodwork. They probably won't show themselves in the most direct way. They'll create other groups that try to undermine what we're doing. We're not naive to how these things work. What do you do about it? You prepare. You have groups yourself that can speak to whatever holes they might try to poke, and you got to be quick, and you have to mobilize people. So that's in general with regard to opposition that might start showing itself that is actually funded from mysterious places.
So if you have large corporations with a lot of money, they are able to put together voices. And it's not their money that's speaking, it's what they can purchase with that, which is a voice. Mm-hmm. And I believe that in this country, and particularly in this state, we have a strong voice that's going to be able to counteract a voice of opposition. And we have science on our side. And it's really, you can fight science. That there's no doubt people will try to do that. But when you have science and you have this evidence-based clinical studies and you have a voice, various different voices, I don't think that we are going to be having a difficult time finding voices. And it doesn't take millions and millions of dollars to find voices for this particular campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really clarifies the issue that I think your analysis is good. That's where the schism is in our country and probably the world more generally, the schism between kind of corporate oversight of everything and what's really good for the people. I think this brings it to a head in one specific way. I think it's coming to a head in all kinds of ways. And I think that 2020 is kind of an inflection point for a lot of these issues. We'll see how things break out with the people as inspired and motivated to make change as they are, especially around here. Mm-hmm. With regard to compass pathways, essentially agnostic at this point. Certainly when big money interests come in, and I don't really know who they are. I mean, I haven't met them. I've read some things. I've read things that are concerning, and I've read things that are not, kind of just showing them as people who want to make some change and have their way of doing it. I've learned just from being in this campaign that you can't, the narratives out there are not always accurate. We've been portrayed this way and that, and it's weird to see your story put into various places when it's not accurate. So I'm holding out to learn more about it. I would say that on the positive side, they've certainly helped move things forward in the FDA approval process. But like most people, I'm suspicious about the possibility of what's the word I'm looking for?
Where they're trying to take over and
people say monopolizing. I don't think that that's really possible. They're patenting, and you can't patent psilocybin. Psilocybin is a off patent. You can patent delivery methods and things of that nature, and potentially derivatives. But I don't know about
synthesis stuff. Yeah.
We need to understand, especially as our country is a country basically formulated on capitalism, and that it's going to happen. And the voice is to be reasonable and to understand that this is going to unfold in a way where people are going to look for opportunities to make money using these medications, these plants. And that's okay, actually. What's not okay is intention. If the intention is to hoard something to the point where the prices go up so high that individuals don't have fair access to it, then we have a problem. Mm-hmm. And research doesn't have fair access to research because somebody's patented how research must happen with what medication or synthesized product must be used in order to do research, then we have a problem. We have to collaborate to determine what works for each state and each demographic, and we go within that context. And there is a place for capitalism, and there's a place for grassroots, and there's a place for basically trying to understand how to marry the two together. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, with pharma, people would not have, they wouldn't, they'd have, without chemotherapy, where would cancer patients be? So it's not that pharma is evil. It's that we need to find a better way to utilize what pharma has the capability of doing, which is research, and making it more affordable and available to the population. Whereas right now, for instance, vaccines and things of that nature, people in Africa, for instance, I lived there for years, they couldn't access these simple vaccines because they didn't have the money. So it's about...
There is just a central issue there, though, that capitalism doesn't really match up with healthcare.
It doesn't.
The incentives are all wrong, and that's why we have these suspicions about where things could go wrong, is that if you're trying to make a buck the idea then would be to keep people, sick, basically. So that's a broader healthcare issue. But so how that plays out with psilocybin, I mean, I think here in Oregon, we're creating a framework that attempts to protect the groundedness of this service provision in the community. Mm-hmm. We want to bring the underground above ground. And so that's what we're focused on.
And wouldn't it be amazing if in this state we passed this law and organizations and institutions, for instance, like the Oregon Health Science University, right? They could, if they wanted to, be licensed to facilitate and be a licensed service center. And under the umbrella of that service center, so much research could be done.
Yeah, just tracking data, and then grad students or whatever, or dignified sciences have that data set to work with, and science can come out of that.
Yeah, and that would be really a great thing to unfold from this initiative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your organization is a not-for-profit, is it not?
Yes. Well, we have two organizations: the campaign organization, which is 501c4 essentially.
Still a not-for-profit, but
basically a petition committee registered with the state right now, and it'll become a 501c4 once we get on the ballot. We also have the Oregon Psilocybin Society, which is an educational 501c3. By that I mean nonprofits, and it's U.S. terminology, but so one's an educational wing and one's a campaign force.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not particularly against capitalism. I mean, I definitely would rather capitalism over intense socialism or communism. Those haven't seemed to go pretty well, and they have not seemed to go well at all historically. But certainly the intent, or the perspective of priority inside of a capitalist model, and where to apply capitalistic motive, and where to hybridize with some sort of socially provided funding for services that are essential to human life. I mean, I think that's the right direction for us to go. At least it's a good direction to go as an established capitalist society, until our United Federation of Planet type Star Trek economy comes in eventually, hopefully, where no money is needed. I mean, okay, I'm just gonna put Star Trek aside. I'm just gonna put it aside.
That's where we're headed. That's the bigger. Yeah, that's the big. But that's what the mushroom really wants.
I think that if we look at this, if we're honest with ourselves, the underground that is providing these services, some people do it for free, but the majority do not. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we get a lot of people arguing, well, you're going to be siding with the elite corporate capitalistic mindset, the truth is that therapists don't make a lot of money, but they do make money. And underground people who are doing this, they are charging fees. And that is not bad. But what we want to do is provide them a legal way to do that. And we don't want this to get locked up in the medical system where
it gets exorbitant.
Yeah, where it becomes unaffordable. And you can't even get there unless you have specific diagnoses and things of that nature. So it's just a matter of being centered and really knowing the truth, knowing that simply because a person is going to be making money off of providing these services or off of growing mushrooms doesn't mean that they're bad, because they're not.
That is a bit of a tough sell. I mean, like I'm obviously like out in the open as a psychedelic person in the world, and some of my stuff gets a pretty wide reach, and and I also ask for money. I say, hey, support me on Patreon or whatever, or I released a lecture recently and it was $10, for 2 hours of your 2 hours of enjoyment, and it's amazing the backlash I get sometimes from people who have, deep trauma and really negative stories, or deep shame or embarrassment or anger against money, and the belief that these stories, based on really great example of how terrible money can, like how terrible the things money can drive people to do might be, and then end up casting that shade onto everyone else who happens to, be doing what needs to be done in order to achieve anything in this world without riding on the backs of other people, basically extorting other people to give you things for free, is to make money so that you can facilitate what needs to be done in a money-driven society. So I'm with you. I'm with you guys on that.
I think like when we talk about making money off of something, I think of it more like support for doing good. Mm-hmm. Right? Can we accept that idea that the idea is to support each other for doing good in the world? It seems like we have a certain shame around making a living doing the things that really actually help. Mm-hmm. We're okay with making money doing stuff that is questionable. You know what I mean? Right. It should be the other way around.
Well, here's the thing that these
workers don't get paid. They should. They're actually helping people. Well, the banker is, so the priorities are backwards, and and I think we've been kind of programmed to be self-conscious about making money when we're doing things that actually help people.
Well, that's the thing. That's part of the story. These people who are hating on everyone who's say, take money out of the psychedelic scene or whatever else. It's like you can't ask for money for something so spiritual, whatever. It's like, how much of you are wondering that perhaps you've been trained like a dog, to attack with guilt and shame against yourself and anyone else that happens to be doing good and getting the necessary capital to continue doing that good by the people who do not want you to succeed in that. It's like the reality is that the people who are rich want to keep the people who might jeopardize those rich people's funding. They want to keep those people poor. And a great way to do that is to convince those poor people to hate on each other for making money.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good analysis.
And that is a very good analysis. And when we talk about this as a grassroots movement, it doesn't mean that it's not going to afford people a way to make a living. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we do get backlash. Well, you should do this. There should be people who it should be written into the law that X amount of people should be able to get this service for free. Yeah. Well,
how is that going to happen?
How is that going to happen? Yeah.
Like, is legislation going to pass where we're carving money out of taxpayers' dollars to give psychedelics to people? I mean, let's be rational. That's not going to work.
People need cars. Should Ford be required to give 25% of the nation free cars? Mm-hmm. Because people need cars. Okay, so if we reduce this to what we're really talking about here, doing good and doing good for money are not that. They're not.
Let's. This is true, and let's talk about what we did do to contain costs, because it is a valid question.
It is.
And people hear, like in the research, that each subject in the studies cost, whatever, $1,000.
It's crazy.
The psilocybin itself costs $7,000 and that's not going to be the case in Oregon. I think that there's this idea that it's going to be elitist or something. So because we protected this and kept it out of the medical realm, you're not going to get those skyrocketing hospital type fees. We're talking about just regular folks like you and I taking the time to do some training and getting licensed. And the barriers to entry, there are some. You have to have a facility. You have to have somewhere to do it. It can't be your living room. Okay, so you have to have a premise, an office, or something that can meet the safety requirements. So it's not easy to get into it's not without barriers to get in the door, but those barriers are pretty basic and pretty doable for anyone has the discipline and the heart and the desire to get into this game. And then from there, there's nothing, you set your own costs. Yeah. You could make a nonprofit and raise money to give the services for free. We have to be the adults that create this framework once it's passed to do it in a way that reflects the heart of this movement.
So rather than having it in the law, which you can't do anyway, that there has to be free services, if that's your motive, if that's your drive, get into this and get the money, raise the money, and be able to legally offer these services to people that need it for free. If that's where you're at, do it. That's the beauty of the system.
We're therapists, and most therapists work on a sliding scale. We talk to people about what they can afford and things like that. There's no reason why this couldn't be the same.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wonder about that too. I mean, first off, I want to say, like, I think it's underwritten in what we're talking about here, which is that, this is all great. We're talking about making money for doing good, or doing good and making money as a part of it. But one of my friends and a colleague, who's also the chair for MAPS Canada, Trevor Miller, he had this interesting lecture called Psychedelic Entrepreneurship or something. And he said, like, work towards whatever you need to achieve what it is that you need to achieve. And if that includes lots of money, sure, go for it. But always continue to ask yourself if what you're doing is in alignment with the truth of our unity. Regardless of what good I might be doing, if in the long run I'm taking more from other people or from the environment or from this or that, causing more damage in my wake than the little bit of good I think I'm doing, then I think I'm out of alignment with that truth. And I don't see that as something you're doing, or myself, but I think it's important to keep in mind, right? Because we can kind of get high on ourselves sometimes, especially with money. When more it comes in, the more high we get. But I have a specific question, because you kind of have Medicare in the United States recently, sort of, not really. From what I understand, it's it's the best you've ever had, and it's also total shit. But here in Canada, we have universal medical care, health care, and it's great, and it's also shit, because I don't think it was really designed very well, and it's really more sick care than ensuring healthy people a lot of the time. But unlike in the United States, or maybe this is different, correct me if I'm wrong, in Canada, there are protections set up for people who desperately need services but are completely incapable of funding those things, funding those services, be it housing or this or that. There are certain protections that are set up to help those people move into getting the medical care that they need. Is this something that you've considered, or is it something that Oregon has? What about the people who really have nothing but might benefit? Like, where do you see that coming in? Is that going to be left up to the service provider to decide when they will subsidize for somebody in need, or is that written inside of the initiative as well?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. It would be really hard, again, to write that into the initiative, being that there's no coverage for these kind of services. I mean, this is going to be in the private sector. I cannot see carving out funds from the state to provide these services. That just isn't going to be.
Well, it's federally illegal.
Yeah.
And so it's just not going to happen in terms of insurance unless some human being with a lot of money wants to come in and set up an organ insurance so that you could pay X amount of dollars per month and get these services. You can privatize health insurance for sure, but it's federally illegal. And so we
have to be realistic and think about what we can do instead about kind of waxing about what is not going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that as a message to the psychedelic community out there, we would love to collaborate on those questions. We're not going to just suddenly have some utopia where the state is sponsoring psychedelic sessions. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Maybe someday, but not in this step.
Star Trek. Yeah. We're getting there.
I mean, if we prove, over the years, if this is proven to be what we think it is, then maybe that can happen. But in launching and getting this into the bloodstream, what can we do to help each other create a service framework that doesn't leave people out? I think that's a very good question to ask, and it's a collaborative question. Can we, for example, all work toward developing a central nonprofit that is raising money for those ends? Mm-hmm. So we've got to take it into our own hands, basically. This whole movement is about taking it into our own hands. It's not going to get written into law that this is going to be supported by taxpayer dollars. Mm-hmm. This is something have to do ourselves.
Now, I wonder if it would be possible.
Maybe that initiates change down the road. So, yeah.
I was going to say, I wonder if it would be possible to, have a nonprofit that basically service providers are able to, on their own, if they like, contribute a percentage of their profit, or people who go through the therapy who find it to be beneficial it's like written into the fee, the service center can say, like, if you like, you can, you could tip, you could tip, but you're not tipping the facilitator, you're tipping towards a pool that allows, somebody with less privilege or access to receive that at another time. And that's like written into whatever connects all the centers together, that there can be this sort of like central way to put money in a fund. Now, how you would go through approving those people, and then, whether or not the service providers will offer themselves as a subsidized service to, receive the funds back to facilitate to somebody, I don't know, but that's just something to think about.
It's possible, James. The thing is that we have to take care of each other, and to grow mushrooms and to have people sit with you and guide you through a safe service costs money, and that's the bottom line. So what we would like to see people do is care about each other enough to understand that while it is most people are going to charge fees for this, and there will be some demographics that this is going to be more difficult for services for them to obtain. It's something that we, the people, can change. We can do. We can set up nonprofits, as we're talking about here. We can, in our own service centers, if we want. Once we're licensed, we can say, would you like to donate towards somebody else who can't afford these services, who calls in? We have this fund set aside for those people. We can do this. We don't have to have the law telling us we have to do this. It needs to come from the law of our heart. And we can do this, and we should do this because we care, not because we're being told by the law that we have to offer services for free. We should do this because the law of our heart and our mind says this is needed. And I believe if we do it with that intention, it will unfold beautifully.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And then also, just for, like, appropriate skepticism or like challenge, I'm not sure the term I'm looking for here. It can also feel a little idealistic to say, oh, but we should give away for free because it's what our heart, it's what's good for the heart, or because it's in our hearts. And, I'm not entirely like, I feel like people who provide and consume mushrooms are much more likely to actually do that in general. Like, that whole increased compassion and openness thing definitely has an impact on how we conduct ourselves. And I want to thank you both for treading right now into pretty sticky territory to talk about the politics of money and service providing and this kind of stuff. It's a hot topic, and it's a divisive one. Before we run out of time here, I'd like to shift gears a little bit. Actually, I have a quick question, or maybe it's not quick, but I want to get this out. You're not the only state with an initiative. Denver in Colorado, there's an initiative happening there. I assume that you're informed that this is happening. Can you maybe explain to us what the difference is between what you're doing and what they're doing?
Well, I'll start off and then let Tom finish up. We are doing a statewide initiative, and what's happening in Denver is a citywide initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of differences. There's only one thing that we have in common with them, but I'll let Tom.
I'm not an expert on Denver. I think they're working hard to loosen the laws on psilocybin, so that I don't think they're actually changing the law. They're creating they're deprioritizing it in law enforcement. So basically, it won't be enforced. The laws on the books regarding psilocybin. So that protects people from being arrested and going to jail and losing their job for,
which we also have in our initiative. That's the thing in common that I was talking about.
So it's kind of like they have this kind of backdoor toward kind of legalization policy, even though the law remains on the books. So that's pretty simple.
Let's make sure that that's clear. The laws remain on the book, that it is illegal. What this is doing is saying that it's has zero priority.
Yeah.
So there, if an officer finds somebody who has some psilocybin on them, it is not, they cannot spend city money on arresting that person. It's just a low priority. And it should be, because there's not a lot of crime and criminality involved with mushrooms. So it's good to have that particular mindset that this should not be a high priority.
So
it doesn't open the door, however, for services. It doesn't open the door for people to actually legally find someone that can, if they so desire, sit with them and help them process a psychedelic session. It doesn't protect therapists in any way in terms of using psilocybin-assisted therapy. So that's the difference in our framework, kind of in a nutshell. You have more to add on that?
Yeah, no, not really. I think that our legislation is very detailed, and we present a 50-page regulatory framework to cover all the ins and outs of psilocybin therapy. I think that's what makes our legislation a bit unique. Best luck to Denver.
Yeah.
And we're on good terms with their campaign. Good guys over there. So.
And it's it shouldn't be a priority for the authorities in this country. If we look at drug policy reform overall, it's really bad policy to put people in jail, first-time offenders who aren't out selling to kids in large markets of underground drugs to people who are dying. But just in general, if you want to go out and pick a mushroom and consume it, you shouldn't go to jail.
I completely agree. Oh, yeah.
Well, here in Oregon, we have, mushrooms grow in our coastal forests. Every fall people are out picking. And so we think that should be not a high crime.
Yeah, it really does. It seems like a dark fantasy novel, or some sort of like dystopian world of like innocent people, like non-violent people who go off into the woods by themselves with each other to pick mushrooms and enjoy the reveries of love and bliss and cosmic wonder and vulnerability with each other, being arrested violently and put into a prison cell, and then having their entire lives dismantled as a consequence of being convicts, or convicted of a federal charge. It's just so ludicrous that it seems like it couldn't be real, but it is.
It needs to be said, just like you said it, to bring all the absurdity out, as much as possible, because I think we do get programmed into accepting things that are insane. And that's why it was important to us to at least address that, even though it wasn't our initial interest. We're therapists, we're interested in the clinical point of view and the research, but if you have an opportunity to put light on that and correct it in any way, that's what we just have to do, because that's what people are going to look back in 100, 200,000 years and say,
yeah.
Just like we look back at craziness
ancient
of
civilizations,
medieval times or something, that's what's going to jump out today.
Well, this is something that I recently went to England. Well, I don't know recently according to this recording, and I was to present sort of in association with doing, or associated to the premise of doing good for the planet, insofar as like ecological integrity. I gave a presentation on psychedelics to a room full of people who mostly don't know anything about it or only have stigma. And definitely the pro-eco-mindedness or the tendencies for psilocybin or psychedelic use to increase pro-environmental behavior as a consequence of people's self-construal, the construct about who they perceive themselves to be expanded to include nature as an extension of ourselves, obviously makes us less likely to act like shitheads when it comes to environmental behavior. But as we were talking about it, one of the examples I came up with, which is that, in 20 years, I honestly believe we'll look back on the stigma we have against psychedelic users now, and see it as no different than if we now look back on the stigma that used to be held against homosexual people. You know, I mean, not everybody, but most intelligent, wise people at this point recognize that there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to judge, hate, shame, ridicule, you know, like the horrendous shit that used to be done against gay people. It's ludicrous now to any modern educated person. And I think in 20 years we'll look back and have a similar perspective, not to take from the struggle of gay people because they've been struggling hard, but you know, I think we'll look back on psychedelic users and have an equal sense of like, wow, it was so ludicrous that we used to destroy people's lives and like violently cage them for picking mushrooms out of the ground so they could laugh at the universe.
Yeah, I hope that you're right, and I think that that's what we should certainly strive for, to be a culture that recognizes the absurdity that we've allowed to exist on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you were asking about just the dangers of standing up in the face of big entities and the government in general. And you have to. I mean, this is the struggle of humanity. People have to stand their ground for what is clearly. It's very clear to us that this is a righteous movement in that sense, you know, just on the level of liberty and freedom to explore your own mind, not to mention all the good that can come out of it, healing that can come out of it. That at some point, you know, we're getting a little older. We want to stand for something. We want to, you know, it's just important. It's important because it heals people, and it's important because of what it represents. You know, it represents reclaiming something about ourselves, both individually and culturally. And even if you never use psychedelics, the fact that you can would be hugely symbolic of a step forward in our culture, in which we need to look inward, and we need to at least affirm that looking inward is not only a legitimate direction, but an imperative at this time when we face outsized planetary problems.
Yeah.
And you know, wouldn't it be wonderful? That's really well said, Tom. If 1,000 years from now, as a modern civilized society, different from modern civilized societies of the times when they were modern, right? Like, so 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, Egypt was the civilized modern society. So now we have technology. Now we have a different type of modernization. Wouldn't it be great if 1,000 or 2,000 years from now, as we look back maybe on the rock paintings in the Saharan desert or in Spain, we think about the cultural use of psilocybin with the Mayans and the Aztecans, and we look back at their history and we go, what were they doing, and how did it unfold them as a people? Wouldn't it be great if a couple thousand years from now, society looks back and remembers, okay, Western society, Western culture now has its own footprint on how to use this beautiful medicine in a way to change people's minds enough to save themselves, and by saving themselves to save our planet, to save our civilization. And I'm hopeful that we might not have rock paintings that represent Western cultural change, but we'll have electronic imprints, we'll have books, we'll have other things that people can look back and say, there was a shift right there, a leap in transformation for the mind and the spirit of humanity in regards, combined with capitalism and various other things that we've talked about.
Yeah, I think that when that future civilization and those scholars of 1,000 years in the distance look back on our culture today, they're not going to care so much about our stupid politics or even our technologies. What's going to be clear to them is our relationship with our own consciousness. and how outward focused we are, how kind of mesmerized we are by material things, how we chase wealth and all of this stuff. It's all a sign of this kind of affliction, and that's going to stick out because the only way forward is consciousness. I know that sounds kind of general and utopian.
That's a little woo-woo, but I feel you. Yeah.
But it's there, isn't it? We have to go inward. The technology is inward, you know. Mm-hmm. The solutions are in us, as are the problems, you know. We're always looking outward and complaining or this or that, but the work is within, and we all know that, but we have to stand for it.
I gotta say, I feel a little short-sighted as you guys are you know, forwarding ahead 1,000, 2,000 years, and in my mind, I'm just hoping that that enough will change that my nephews will be able to, you know, bring children into this world with hope, or to know what hope feels like by the time they're an adult, because the trajectory we're going now doesn't really, you know, fill me with a sense of trust that they'll get to being of age to be responsible, and that there'll be, you know, a world of hope and wonder left for them, which is, you know, pretty sad. Yeah. So final question. It's right on this vein too. Let's say your initiative, it's a success, you know, celebration for the hopeful future. Let's say it's a success. Let's say that it's such a success that it starts getting exported to other states, and the exporting to other states allows it to scale up, and it scales up. You know, now we're talking like, this is some pretty uphill, like fantasizing here, but it upscales enough that it shifts on a federal level. And it starts to do what happened, you know, with cannabis. You know, the state legalization was fantastic in the US. I think it really helped set the stage for what Canada has eventually done with federal legislation of recreational use, which looks like legalization to some sense, which has then, you know, to the rest of the world now, all of a sudden, even the UN is considering rescheduling cannabis, right? Like things are changing. Now, let's say that starts happening with psilocybin. What do you think the widespread cultural outcome will be of a world where psilocybin-assisted therapy or services, or even just the freedom to go out into nature and be with psilocybin, based on your experiences with them and the communities of people you interact with who have a strong relationship with psilocybin mushrooms, what do you think will be the cultural outcome of that scenario?
How far along? 20 years from now, 50 years from now?
I feel like 20 years might be a stretch to have the U.S. federally legalize anything. That was Schedule 1. But let's maybe 50 years. Let's say 50 years.
I think there's just so much in the balance in terms of how it unfolds. You know, I think running this campaign has been such a project of shaping the narrative in a constructive way. Psychedelics have always been there. They've always been the same material, but the story around them always changes, right? So if we start telling a story that facilitates their proper use, then I'm very optimistic as to what that means to the culture and the world moving forward. I don't know that it's a panacea. I don't know that it's going to solve all our problems, but it certainly would be an influence in the right direction. And it could make a real impact because, you know, who knows? You know, certain world leaders get touched by psilocybin, and all of a sudden, what would have gone one way is going another way. So, and you know, that happens over and over. You know, there's a possibility that it could really influence the world.
I think it's like 50 years from now, if we let's try to avoid Ready Player One, right? That's what we're trying to do.
Yes.
We're all escape into AI because we can't handle our reality. So I think 50 years from now, if we were to see this implemented nationwide, for instance, in our country, one of the things that I anticipate as a person who works with other people, counseling them and whatnot, is that we will see you said it, a more connected humanity to nature, understanding that we are nature, we are not separate from nature. And I think just that shift in perception will change a lot of the ways that we create law. What is important to us to legislate and what is important to us to be able to simply do, because our mind is clean and clear, and we can understand that violence always begets violence, and hate begets hate, and this cleansing of the mind that can happen, like Tom said, it's not a panacea, but it can happen, I think will open the doors for a change in government in terms of the people who are 10 today, 50 years from now when they're 60 and they're running for positions of leadership in our country, that their mindset will be different because they've been exposed to themselves. And when we can see ourselves more clearly, you cannot fix what you do not know is wrong. And the beautiful thing about psilocybin is that it helps you to see what's broken so that you can fix it. And I believe that culturally it's going to help heal and fix a wounded country.
And importantly, psilocybin services, it's one thing. A lot of people have had incredible experiences out in a festival recreationally, and that's all well and good, but it fades away. But if more and more people not only have the experience, but have it optimized and then have it integrated therapeutically so it becomes a practice in their life, that's a whole different story, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to influence the trajectory of that person's life and their intention into the world moving forward. So that's, I think, what's important. To narrow down a little bit, let's look at the possibilities of healthcare and how it influences what psychiatry looks like.
In our own state.
This has been something I've been struggling with since I started studying psychology back in the 90s. There was a time where it was very analytical and introspective. Insight-oriented therapy was the therapy. And then in the 80s and 90s, it got taken over by pharma and it became this medical model of the spirit, as I saw it. And I never felt that was accurate or helpful or constructive. There's a place for medications for certain psychiatric diagnosis, but it's as a prevailing model of helping people deal with themselves and their mental health. It's entirely destructive and feeds this kind of notion that something from the outside is going to make you better, right? And so psilocybin turns all that inside out. And I know it's something you have to consume, so there's an irony there.
Right.
But those of us who have worked with it know that it activates the so-called inner healer. It helps you heal yourself and helps you address your problems.
May I add something to that?
That is, just a second, that is would be a welcome turn in the enterprises of therapy and psychiatry and healthcare more generally as we look at different ways to approach our own well-being.
Mm-hmm. What I wanted to supplement what Tom was saying was that we already have people using psilocybin, and they have been, as he said, recreationally for a long time. I think what this initiative is how it's going to impact our culture in the future moving forward is that we are providing a modality that science has already provided, and we're basically implementing that modality into our culture and our civilization now. And using it with set and setting and intention is different and will have a different outcome than just legalizing it and being able to use it for recreation freely. Not that people shouldn't have that opportunity, but what I'm thinking about in terms of structure and our initiative is that when used right for and I say that when used right, for a specific intention. Moving forward, I think this initiative will prevent what kind of unfolded with Timothy Leary in that whole era, right? It will show that there is a reasonable way to use these types of medicines, these types of plants, to actually to transform the human being. And it won't be dangerous per se to government. Perhaps maybe it will be just the opposite. Perhaps by having us with this modality, the fear and the stigma that's there right now will be changed, because people will see that it can be used in such a way to create, as you were saying with your friend, a sense of eco-mindedness, right? And creativity and things of that nature. So I think that this initiative, in terms of your question, helps us as a culture to use it in such a way that it benefits not just us personally, but society as a whole. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That I believe I guess what I'm trying to say is the process that we set up is very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm thinking about this, and as we're speaking, I'm like feeling really emotional, actually, because it's like, you know, I am completely in love with my life, and in no small part, I have psilocybin to thank for that, and the perspective that it offered me over the years, and the idea that people who would otherwise never be able to get the perspective needed to be able to love their life, will have institutions set up to provide that to them, is a really beautiful thing.
That's the heart of this movement, this initiative, and the psychedelic movement more generally. That's what it's got to be about, because that's what's going to facilitate our evolution as people, as it has done so beautifully for us individually, those of us who have been touched by it. So mm-hmm. You couldn't have said it better.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's draw a close there at that happy note, huh? Tom and Sheri, why don't you tell me how we, the larger people, can learn more about what you're doing, how we can support you. Tell us about how to get involved with OPS and Psy 2020. Give us the download, social media handles, the package.
Sure. So we have a website, www.psi-2020.org. That's where you'll find the information about the campaign. Psy 2020 is the Psilocybin Service Initiative 2020. You can donate on the website. We also have an active Facebook page where you can keep abreast of the science that's coming out and anything new in the policy reform world. We have lots of events. If you're around Portland, we actually have a big fundraising event on March 3rd, which we're looking forward to. It's in the grand ballroom of the Portland Art Museum, and luminaries such as Robin Carhart Harris, Paul Stamets,
Mark
Hayden will be there to get behind this initiative. So we see that as kind of an epic, perhaps even historic event, as it really is kicking the initiative into a new phase of support, which we're really excited about, because we need a lot of money to get 150,000 signatures, as well as to just run a campaign on the level that we're going to need to run it, considering some of the things we've talked about earlier with potential moneyed interests.
So the ops Facebook is Facebook.com/OPSBUZZ, or the Oregon Psilocybin Society, however you want to search for it.
Yeah.
We also sell T-shirts to supplement the donation process of getting the signatures right now. Mm-hmm. And we look to expand perhaps the shop, so to say, to provide materials that people would want to use that will actually benefit the initiative.
And all proceeds go directly to the initiative. We're a volunteer crew right now, including us. We don't take any money from the campaign or anything. So we move that money right into signatures. So if you donate, it goes right to creating the possibility of everything we've talked about today.
And on the psi2020.org, you can find all of the events that we have. And by attending these events, you can help us to change the stigma around psilocybin and psilocybin-assisted therapy. By attending these events, you are also supporting the initiative so that financially we are raising that money that we need to get onto the ballot and then win the vote. So Psi 2020 is where you'll find the donations. It's where you'll find the events. It's where you'll find the materials. And then our Facebook page is where you will be able to every day learn a little bit more about psilocybin and what's going on worldwide in terms of how to use it and what's happening in nationwide or worldwide with different organizations. So we're also on Instagram, the Oregon Psilocybin Society, and we're on Twitter as at OPSBUZZ.
Excellent. Well, I will, in post-production, be revisiting this exact moment in the conversation and listing all the things that you have just mentioned there to include them as links in the show notes of this episode at jameswjesso.com for the listeners. Thank you so much for your time today and also for everything that you're doing. It's really beautiful. And I'm although I'm here in Ontario, Canada, I can't even enter the United States. I feel like my soul is being nourished by what you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for the enlightening perspectives as well.
Thank you for giving us opportunity to have a voice with your listeners. We appreciate you and what you're doing. It matters, James.
Thank you. And cut. All right. Woo.
That's good.
Yeah, it went well. All right, that's it for this episode. I mean, don't tune out just yet. Hang around for a second. I'm real happy that you're still listening, that you made it all the way through. Hope that you enjoyed it. Hope that you take a second to jump over to the links that are contained at jameswjesso.com in the show notes for this to support the Oregon. What, did I say that right? Oregon? Is that lame? Oregon Psilocybin Society and the Psilocybin Service Initiative, Psi 2020, in their quest to bring this in. I think it's, like we ended there. Sorry, I'm seeming a little strange, but I'm going to go for it. It feels real. I have a lot of hope, or faith. I'm not sure which one it is, that, the integration of psilocybin, into our modern Western world and the consequences of how that changes the way we see ourselves, and the planet that we're on, and our relationships, and the larger, super organismal structure and complex system dynamics that give rise to the larger planetary ecology of which we are a part, that the way that those experiences change our relationship to that will be positive for us in the long run. And I think in the short term, but certainly in the long run. Anyway, so check them out, support them. You can also support the podcast here. It'd be amazing. Love that. By heading to jameswjesso.com/support. Leave a donation, PayPal, crypto of some variety. Actually, right now I only have Bitcoin and Litecoin. I had my wallets with all my coins in it on Quadriga. If you're a crypto person, you probably know why I now only have Bitcoin and Litecoin on separate wallets, because I made a mistake. Yeah. Anyways, you could also do PayPal, Patreon. It's all there, jameswjesso.com/support. Again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for checking out the subreddit, sharing this podcast with a friend, and doing what you can do to help bring psilocybin into the world more fully, and letting its impact positively touch the rest of the world in a good way. Okay, thanks. Take care.